We have been torn up watching what has happened and is currently happening to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. We have seen videos of entire neighborhoods being destroyed. We have seen the videos of people, even children, being trapped underneath of buildings that are bombed under the rubble for days and days, with people trying to rescue them from it, removing the rubble to try to save even young children stuck in it and sometimes not being able to do so. We've seen the videos of those who are killed in hospitals, those killed in bakeries, those killed even inside of schools. And I'm sure you've seen videos I even haven't seen. And sometimes when we see these images, when we hear these stories, we feel pain and sorrow within us. We see these images of suffering, or even just the thought of what it must be like to be our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Just the thought of what it's like to live there right now, to be running from building to building, trying to find shelter somewhere, not knowing when or where the next bomb is going to fall. And all of this pain can sometimes translate into despair. People begin to wonder, why is Allah not granting us victory? People begin to wonder, why is all this suffering happening to our brothers and sisters? People begin to think negatively about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah's refuge from that. And we wonder over and over, where is the victory? Where is our freedom? Where is our strength? And I want to remind you today, in the time that we have together, of the words of Allah. أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. That without question, the victory of Allah is near. The help and the aid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is close by. This is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what does it mean that the victory of Allah is near? What does it mean that divine help and divine aid is near from Allah Azza wa Jal? Think about Khabbab ibn al-Arat radiyallahu anhu, when he came to our Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and he pled with him. He's begging him, أَلَا تَدْعُ اللَّهِ أَنْ يَسْتَنصِرْ لَنَا. Aren't you going to make dua for Allah to give us victory? Aren't you going to ask Allah to end all of what's happening to us? And Khabbab radiyallahu anhu was a slave who was an ironsmith. And when he accepted Islam, his master, she hired men to torture him. So they would put the steel inside of the fire that he would use as an ironsmith, but they would use it to burn his back. He is not me or you. He comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his back is already burned and whipped, and he's humiliated by his torturers and bruised all over his body. He's not me or you. He's someone who suffered. And he asks the Prophet, أَلَا تَدْعُ اللَّهَ لَنَا أَلَا تَسْتَنصِرْ لَنَا. Aren't you going to make dua for us? Aren't you going to ask Allah to give us victory? And the Prophet ﷺ, in one of the rare times, gets angry. His face turns red. Who is he angry at? He's angry at Khabbab radiyallahu anhu. And he reminds him, and through him, he reminds all of us that throughout history, the believers have to face trial. He tells him, "O Khabbab, the people before us suffered even more." He reminds him of some of the followers of Isa alayhi salam, and how they would torture them. They would even bring the saw and place it between the man's head and saw him until they sawed him in half. They would comb the man with iron combs until they separated the flesh from bone. And the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَا يَرُدُّهُ عَنْ دِينِهِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. And this would not cause the person to be turned away from his religion one bit. He stayed upon his faith. And then he tells Khabbab, And Allah, وَلِيُتِمَّنَّ اللَّهَ هَذَا الْأَمْرِ. Allah will make this matter successful. Allah will complete this religion. Allah will make sure this religion succeeds. Until a woman can travel between two cities in Yemen and she fears nothing except the animals along the path. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ. But you are being a hasty people. Who is he saying this to? Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He's saying it to a man who has been through unspeakable torture. But the Prophet is reminding him, your honor will come through patience. Your victory will come, but it will come through perseverance, through being persistent, through becoming better people as a result of the hardship. وَلَقَدْ فَتَنَّ الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ فَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ صَدَقُوا وَلَيَعْلَمَنَّ الْكَاذِبِينَ. Allah says, we have certainly tested the people before you, and Allah will make clear those who have been truthful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He will make clear those who are liars. Allah will make clear those of us who have true iman, and He will make clear those of us who are going to betray Allah and His Messenger and the believers. Your reward is going to be achieved, but you have to go through the fitna, the trial, the hardship. Too often we are hasty. In fact, we are more than hasty, we are arrogant. We're not begging Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help like we are servants. No, we're demanding it like we are entitled. We demand that Allah gives us victory. And if He doesn't give us victory now, we want to lose faith over it. We demand that we see the end to what we are seeing in front of our eyes right now, and if we don't see it, then we start to question Allah. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. But Allah is the King. He knows what we don't know. He will arrange the affairs as He pleases, not as we do. But He reminds us, وَإِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا. But if you are patient and persevere, and if you have taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will not be harmed by the planning and the plotting. Think about it like this. If Allah gave us victory before we were people of taqwa, we will think that the ma'asiyah is good. We will think the disobedience of Allah is good. We will think that evil is good if we received victory before we rectified ourselves. If He gave us victory and we are disunited, we would think that disunity is good. If He gave us victory and we are treacherous towards one another, we will think that treachery and betrayal is good. وَلَكِنَّكُمْ تَسْتَعْجِلُونَ. But you are being hasty. And notice the words of our Prophet ﷺ. He didn't say to Khabbab, the victory is promised to you and to me. He says there will be a victory. Maybe it will be generations later. Maybe we won't even see it, but there will be a victory. And you work towards that. And you have yaqeen in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that that is going to happen. And it's important for us to know that hardship is part of the process of victory. Pain is part of the path towards success. We are never going to have success until we go through the process and the pain that comes with it. So Allah, when He tells you, أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ, indeed, the victory of Allah is close, it is near. But before that, what does He tell you? أَمْ حَسِبْتُمْ أَن تَدْخُلُوا الْجَنَّةَ وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَزُلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولُ الرَّسُولُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ مَتَىٰ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. Allah says, do you think you're going to enter paradise and you're not going to be tested and tried like the people before you? مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ. They were tested with every kind of hardship, emotional and material. وَزُلْزِلُوا, and they were shaken. Until even the Prophet amongst them, the Messenger and the believers, the true believers, قَالُوا مَتَىٰ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ. They said, when is the victory of Allah coming? That's how shaken they were. That's how difficult the tests were. أَلَا إِنَّ نَصْرَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ. Then Allah tells you, the victory of Allah is near. The hardship has to come first. Then with patience and perseverance and iman, then the victory comes forward. وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْهُمْ أَئِمَّةً يَهْدُونَ بِأَمْرِنَا لَمَّا صَبَرُوا وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ. We made from them leaders guiding to our command. When did they become leaders? لَمَّا صَبَرُوا, when they were persistent. وَكَانُوا بِآيَاتِنَا يُوقِنُونَ, and they had yaqeen, certainty in the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We see this in the verses of Al-Ahzab, when the Arabs gathered the biggest army possible to exterminate Islam and to arrive at Medina to kill all of the Muslims. What does Allah say? وَلَمَّا رَأَى الْمُؤْمِنُونَ الْأَحْزَابَ, when the believers saw the biggest army the Arabs ever raised, when they saw their swords and their shields, and they saw them at their doorstep, and they know that they want to kill them. قَالُوا هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. They said, this is the promise of Allah and His Messenger. They saw the hardship as the promise of Allah. They said, Allah promised us victory. We have to go through the hardship before we get the victory. They saw the soldiers. They saw their swords and their arrows, and they said, the victory of Allah is here. هَذَا مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَصَدَقَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا. And it did not increase anything in them except their iman, their belief in Allah, and their submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the hypocrites, when they saw the same army, the same soldiers, the same swords, the same arrows, the same cavalry, what did they say? بَلْ ظَنَنْتُمْ أَنْ لَن يَنْقَلِبَ الرَّسُولُ وَالْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِلَىٰ أَهْلِهِمْ أَبَدًا. You thought that the believer and the prophet were never going to go back to their homes. You thought, that's it, everybody's going to die. It's over. وَزُيِّنَ ذَلِكَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ وَظَنَنْتُمْ ظَنَّ السُّوءِ وَكُنْتُمْ قَوْمًا بُورًا. You believed this to happen, and you were a ruined people. You assumed all of this evil was going to happen. The moment they saw the tribes and the strength of that army, they had these evil thoughts about Allah Azza wa Jal. They said, this is our hour of death. Now we're all going to be killed. And today, there are people who see the events the same way. There are people who say we're going to be destroyed for sure. We're going to lose for sure. We don't have the armies. We don't have the money. We don't have the power. Even our own rulers are against us. And so we think we're going to lose for sure. We think Palestine will be lost for sure. And we have these evil thoughts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we need to be like the believers. When you see all of the odds are stacked against us, our iman in Allah goes up. Our faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes up. وَمَا زَادَهُمْ إِلَّا إِيمَانًا وَتَسْلِيمًا. They only increased in their iman. They said, this is the promise of Allah and His Messenger. The fact that everyone is against us is the sign of Allah and His Messenger. Is the promise that we're going to have success. This is optimism. وَلَيَنْصُرَنَّ اللَّهَ مَنْ يَنْصُرُهُ. That we remember that Allah promises He will certainly give victory to those who give victory to Him. وَكَانَ حَقًّا عَلَيْنَا نَصْرُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And Allah says it is binding upon us to give victory to the believers. So we have to be optimistic too. Too often we put ourselves down. Too often we say Muslims are this and Muslims are that. We say the Muslims are too weak. We say this over and over and over again until it becomes a belief in our mind. We are too weak. And no doubt, in our history we were stronger. In our history we were truly strong and noble and powerful. But let me tell you, we are not weak. Our enemies do not see us as being weak. In fact, the enemies of this ummah, they marvel at this ummah. They marvel at the strength of this ummah. They think to themselves, after everything we have done to them, they're still standing. After everything we've done to them, they become stronger. After everything we've done to them, they grow. Their masjids are full. My mother, she's here probably. When she went to university in the late 60s, early 70s, I'm dating her, she might get upset. She told me in her college, her entire college, one of the bigger universities in Egypt, there was not a single woman who wished to wear hijab. She was the first woman to wear hijab in her university. Today you go to Egypt, all of the universities are filled with women who wear hijab. They look to us like, how is it every time we try to smash Islam, they come back? Every time we try to remove Islam, they come back. That's how they think about us. They're astonished. We invested so much to make them turn away from their religion, to make them be liberal and Western and westernized and secular and nationalistic, and they keep thinking like an ummah. Do you know in Algeria, which was colonized for over 100 years by the French, Al-Amir Abdul Qadir, he gave a fatwa that Muslims are not allowed to eat white sugar. Why? Because they found out that the French would dig up the bones of people who had died, and they would grind the bones and put it inside of the white sugar and sell it to the Muslims. And so when they realized this, they gave a fatwa that it's haram to eat sugar. Amongst the things the French used to do to the Muslims in Algeria, the French would make a bet. They would see a Muslim woman that is pregnant, and one of them would say, I think she's carrying a boy. The other one would say, I think she's carrying a girl. Then what would they do? They would kill her and open her stomach to see what it is, to see who won the bet. These are just some stories of what the French used to do in Algeria. For over 100 years they colonized Algeria, to the point that many Algerians thought they're never going to leave. Let's fight to get citizenship, because the Algerians, if you were Muslim, you didn't get citizenship. Let's fight to get citizenship. They thought the French are never leaving, but they kept fighting. Al-Amir Abdul Qadir kept fighting. His fighting failed, but then other people tried. There was a Jama'iyya al-Islamiyya that started all these Quran schools, started teaching people about the Quran. And what happened at the end of that? People came out of these Quran schools, they were being taught the Quran, but also being taught, you have a religion that is worthy of following. You have faith and morals that are better than what the French are pushing on you. And people came out of those schools and resisted. And after the French, in one of their greatest massacres, one day they said they killed 30,000 Algerians. 15 years later, the French left. The days you think we're never going to win, they have all the power. Allah will give us power if you have patience. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ النَّصْرَ مَعَ الصَّبْرِ. Know that victory comes with persistence, with sabr, with being persistent, with trying over and over and over again. We see this throughout the Muslim world. We could spend all of our time talking about this. Even look at what's happening right now. The Muslim world is standing up and protesting and remembering our brothers and sisters in Gaza. In Egypt, it is forbidden to protest about anything. They couldn't stop them from coming out to the streets, calling out for their brothers and sisters in Gaza. To the point the government today said, okay, we're going to allow you to protest. In the reality, they're saying that because they know they can't stop them. So they don't want it to look like the people are going against the government. All these Muslim countries wanted to normalize with Israel. Now all of a sudden they're stopping and they're criticizing Israel. Why? If it were up to them, they would make the deals. If it was up to them, they want the money. But they know the people are angry. They know the people are angry. They know the people still love each other as an ummah. They know that even though they tried to tell the Egyptians and the Pakistanis and the Saudis and the Khalijis, you have nothing to do with Palestine, it's a different country, who cares about them? It's their fault what's happening to them. How often did they put this on television? All the time. Tell them you guys have nothing to do with each other. You are Egyptian, you have nothing to do with the Palestinians. You are Saudi, you have nothing to do with them. They told us this. And the Muslims don't agree. They still go out in the streets. They still say we're one ummah. They still say we love Allah and His Messenger. Every time they try to bring us down, we have to have sabr and persist and try again. And all of these movements, none of them are perfect. All of them have had problems, absolutely. But they're trying to do better. And if we keep trying to do better, Allah will give us victory. As long as we keep loving Allah and His Messenger and loving each other for being Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us the victory. If not in our lifetimes, then the lifetimes of our children or their children. Just know that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is true. فأقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم استغفروه إنه الغفور الرحيم.